They say your mother's voice becomes the inner critic that follows you for life, but I never imagined mine would be so loud that it would drown out every accomplishment I ever achieved. Standing in the doorway of what used to be my childhood bedroom, now converted into my mother's craft room, I listened to her tell my neighbor Mrs. Henderson exactly what she thought of my life choices. The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to maximize damage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jessica will never amount to anything meaningful, my mother Linda said, with the casual dismissiveness of someone discussing the weather. She's always been the dreamer, the one who thinks the world owes her something. Now she's married to that unemployed man, living in some tiny apartment, probably struggling to pay rent. I warned her about David, but she never listens. Some people are just destined to be disappointments. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my hands trembling as I held the grocery bags I'd brought over. I had driven 20 minutes to surprise my mother with her favorite pastries from the bakery downtown, thinking we could have coffee together like normal families do. Instead, I found myself eavesdropping on my own character assassination. Mrs. Henderson's voice carried a note of discomfort as she responded, "Oh, Linda, I'm sure Jessica is doing fine. Young couples often struggle initially." "You're too kind, Margaret," my mother replied with a bitter laugh. "But I know my daughter. She's 32 years old, and what does she have to show for it? A part-time job at some boutique, a husband who hasn't worked in over a year, and big dreams about starting her own business. Dreams don't pay bills. I raised her better than this, but she insists on learning everything the hard way." The grocery bags felt impossibly heavy in my arms as I processed her words. My mother had reduced my entire existence to a series of failures, painting me as some delusional woman married to a deadbeat. What she didn't know, what I couldn't tell her because David had sworn me to secrecy, was that my unemployed husband was actually a successful day trader who had made more money in the past 6 months than she had made in the past 5 years combined. David had quit his corporate job 18 months ago to focus on trading full-time, but his family background in finance made him incredibly cautious about discussing money. He'd grown up watching his father's business associates take advantage of financial information, and he'd developed an almost pathological need for privacy regarding his earnings. Even I hadn't known the full extent of his success until recently, when he'd casually mentioned that he was considering buying investment properties with his, quote, trading money. "The worst part," my mother continued, her voice growing more animated as she warmed to her subject, "is that she could have had such a different life. Remember Thomas Mitchell's son, the one who became a doctor? He was interested in Jessica all through high school, but she was too busy chasing after bad boys to notice. Now look where that got her." I closed my eyes, remembering Dr. Mitchell's son, Robert, who had indeed expressed interest in me during high school. He was a nice enough person, but our conversations had been painfully dull, revolving around his pre-med studies and his collection of vintage coins. My mother had pushed that relationship so hard that I'd eventually stopped bringing any boyfriends home, knowing she'd find something wrong with each one unless they met her impossibly high standards. "She always thought she was too good for practical advice," my mother went on, and I could practically see her adjusting her reading glasses, a gesture she made whenever she was building up to her most cutting observations. "I told her to marry someone stable, someone with a real career and prospects. Instead, she falls for this David character who spent 2 years unemployed when they met, working odd jobs and talking about, quote, finding himself. Now he's supposedly a day trader, which is just gambling with a fancy name." The irony was almost too much to bear. My mother was criticizing David for being a day trader while simultaneously condemning him for being unemployed. She couldn't have it both ways, but logic had never been her strong suit when it came to her disappointment in me. "What about her business plans?" Mrs. Henderson asked, and I found myself holding my breath for the response. "Oh, that little jewelry thing?" My mother's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "She's been talking about starting a jewelry business for 3 years now. 3 years, Margaret. She makes a few pieces here and there, sells them to friends, and calls it entrepreneurship. Meanwhile, she's living in a shoebox apartment, and her husband sits at home staring at computer screens all day. I swear, I don't know where I went wrong with her. The jewelry business was actually doing better than my mother realized." I'd been building a client base slowly and carefully, focusing on custom pieces that brought in substantial profits. But I'd learned early in life not to share my successes with my mother, because she had a way of diminishing them that made me question whether they were successes at all. She could have been something, my mother concluded with a heavy sigh. She was bright enough when she applied herself. But she's always chosen the easy path, the path of least resistance. Now she's stuck with the consequences. I had heard enough, more than enough. I quietly placed the grocery bags by the front door and walked back to my car, my chest tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. As I sat in my driver's seat staring at my mother's immaculate house with its perfectly manicured lawn and designer garden gnomes, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just casual criticism or maternal concern. This was systematic destruction of my character, performed for the entertainment of a neighbor who probably wished she could escape the conversation. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of tears and angry thoughts. I kept replaying my mother's words, each repetition making them sting more sharply. She didn't just disapprove of my choices. She actively enjoyed detailing my failures to anyone who would listen. I wondered how many other neighbors had heard similar assessments of my life. How many family gatherings had included whispered conversations about my disappointing trajectory? When I arrived home, David was at his usual spot at the kitchen table, multiple monitors displaying charts and graphs that looked like abstract art to me. He glanced up as I entered, his expression immediately shifting to concern when he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked, pushing back from his desk and giving me his full attention. This was one of the things I loved most about David. When he focused on you, you felt like the most important person in the world. "I went to see my mother," I said, dropping my purse on the counter with more force than necessary. She was discussing my life with Mrs. Henderson. In detail, none of it flattering. David's jaw tightened. He'd met my mother exactly 4 times in the 3 years we'd been married, and each encounter had left him quietly furious. He'd never said anything critical about her to me, but I could see the way his shoulders tensed whenever her name came up in conversation. "What did she say this time?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I gave him the highlights, watching his expression grow darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at his computer screens without really seeing them. "She called me unemployed," he said finally, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. "She called me unemployed and said you were struggling to pay rent." "David, you know I don't believe any of that," I said quickly, moving to stand behind his chair. "I know what you do. I know how hard you work. I know how successful you've been." "Do you?" he asked, turning to face me. "Because I've been thinking we need to have a conversation about exactly how successful." There was something in his tone that made me pause. We'd had general discussions about his trading, and I knew he was doing well, but David was intensely private about specifics. He'd grown up in a family where financial information was treated like state secrets, and even after 3 years of marriage, he still played his cards close to his chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. David was quiet for another moment, as if wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, he turned one of his monitors toward me, showing a screen I'd never seen before. It was some kind of account summary, filled with numbers that made my eyes widen. "This is just one of my trading accounts," he said quietly. "I have 7 others." I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. The number at the bottom, labeled Total Portfolio Value, had more digits than I'd expected. Significantly more. "David," I said slowly, "is this real?" "Very real," he replied. "I've been averaging about $40,000 a month in profits for the past 8 months. Some months are better, some are worse, but that's been the average." I did the math in my head and felt my stomach drop. "That's almost $500,000. "This year, yes," he said. "And I've been banking most of it, living off what you make at the boutique to keep our expenses low. I wanted to make sure the success was sustainable before I changed our lifestyle." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by this revelation. My mother had been describing David as unemployed, while he was earning more money than she'd ever dreamed of. The irony was staggering, but it also raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. I mean, I knew you were doing well, but this. Because I wanted to be sure, David said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Trading can be volatile. I've seen people make fortunes and lose them in a matter of weeks. I wanted to prove to myself that I could sustain this level of success before I started making plans based on it. But we're married, I pointed out. We're supposed to be a team. I've been worrying about money, about our future, about whether we could afford to have children someday. David's expression softened. I know. And I'm sorry. I should have been more transparent with you. It's just, my father always said that money changes people, and the knowledge of money changes them even more. I didn't want you to change, didn't want us to change, before I was certain about what we were dealing with. I understood his reasoning, even as it frustrated me. David's father had built and lost several businesses, and David had grown up watching the way financial ups and downs affected his parents' relationship. He'd developed a deep-seated fear of counting on money before it was truly secure. So what now? I asked. What do we do with this information? David smiled, and it was a different smile than I'd seen before. There was something almost mischievous in it, something that reminded me of the man I'd fallen in love with, when he was indeed unemployed and full of big dreams. Now, he said, we decide what we want to do with the fact that your mother thinks we're struggling to pay rent. The way he said it made me sit up straighter. What do you mean? I mean, David said, turning back to his computer, that I've been thinking about making some investments. Real estate specifically. And I happen to know that your mother has been talking about wanting to move to that new development on the other side of town, the one with the luxury condos and the golf course. I felt my pulse quicken. Willowbrook Estates? That's the one, David confirmed. I've been researching the area for investment potential. Those condos start at about $800,000. The penthouse units go for over $1 million. David, those are completely out of our league, I said automatically, then caught myself. I mean, they were out of our league. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This is going to take some getting used to. They're not out of our league, David said firmly, and I've been thinking about your mother's opinion of our financial situation. She seems very concerned about our ability to make ends meet. She is, I said slowly, beginning to see where this was going. She brings it up every chance she gets. She's convinced we're on the verge of financial ruin. Well, David said, pulling up another screen on his computer, maybe it's time we addressed her concerns directly. I watched as he navigated to a real estate website, specifically the listings for Willowbrook Estates. The photos were stunning. Marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, private balconies overlooking the golf course. These were the kind of homes my mother had always dreamed of, the kind of places she'd driven us through when I was a child, pointing out the expensive cars in the driveways and the perfectly landscaped yards. You're thinking about buying one of these? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm thinking about buying one of these in cash, David corrected. As an investment property. And I'm thinking about who we might offer it to first. The implications of what he was suggesting hit me like a physical force. My mother, who had spent the afternoon telling Mrs. Henderson about my disappointing life choices, could be offered the chance to live in her dream home by the unemployed son-in-law she'd been criticizing. She'd never accept it, I said immediately. Her pride wouldn't let her. She might, David said thoughtfully, if she didn't know it was coming from us initially. What if she thought it was coming from someone else? What if she thought she'd won some kind of contest, or received an inheritance from a distant relative? I stared at him, amazed by the complexity of what he was proposing. You want to buy my mother a house without her knowing it's from us? I want to buy your mother a house, David said, and then, at exactly the right moment, I want her to find out where it came from. I want her to understand that the unemployed man she's been worried about has just handed her the thing she's wanted most. The idea was audacious, expensive, and completely unnecessary. It was also the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. Not because it involved money, but because it involved David seeing my pain and deciding to do something about it in the most dramatic way possible. This is crazy, I said, but I was smiling as I said it. Probably, David agreed. But I'm tired of listening to people underestimate us. I'm tired of your mother thinking we're struggling when we're actually thriving. And I'm especially tired of her making you feel bad about the choices you've made. The choices we've made, I corrected him. We're a team, remember? The choices we've made, he agreed. And I think it's time we showed her exactly how those choices have worked out. I looked at the computer screen again, at the photos of pristine kitchens and spacious living rooms, at the kind of luxury my mother had always associated with success. The plan was outrageous, but it was also perfectly targeted. My mother measured worth in material terms, and David was proposing to demonstrate our worth in the language she understood best. How would we even do this? I asked, surprising myself by seriously considering the idea. Very carefully, David said. We'd need to set up a trust. Create a plausible backstory for why she's receiving this gift. Maybe a distant relative she's never heard of. Someone who remembered her in their will. We'd need lawyers, probably a private investigator, to create a convincing family history. You've really thought about this, I observed. I've been thinking about it since the last time she made you cry, David admitted. That was 2 months ago, when she told you that you were wasting your potential by staying married to me. I started researching ways to make a statement that couldn't be misinterpreted. I remembered that conversation. My mother had been particularly brutal that day, suggesting that I was still young enough to start over if I made better choices. She'd stopped just short of telling me to leave David, but the implication had been clear enough. She's going to figure it out eventually, I pointed out. She's not stupid. She is, David said, but not until after she's moved in, after she's invited Mrs. Henderson over to see her new place, after she's bragged to everyone about her good fortune, not until she's committed to the narrative that her life has taken a turn for the better. And then, David said, his smile widening, we tell her the truth. We tell her that her unemployed son-in-law bought her dream house with cash, and that her daughter, who will never amount to anything, made it possible by supporting him through the period when he was building his success. I felt a surge of something that wasn't quite revenge, but wasn't quite justice either. It was more like vindication, the prospect of finally being seen clearly by someone who had consistently refused to see me at all. This is really happening, I said, not quite believing it myself. Only if you want it to, David said. It's your mother, your relationship. I won't do anything that makes you uncomfortable. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard that afternoon, about the casual cruelty in my mother's voice as she'd dissected my life for Mrs. Henderson's entertainment. I thought about all the times she'd made me feel small, all the ways she'd diminished my accomplishments and criticized my choices. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn her approval, only to realize that her approval wasn't actually available to me. I want to do it, I said firmly. I want to do exactly what you're suggesting. David nodded, already turning back to his computer. Then we need to start planning. This is going to require precision, timing, and a lot of patience. How long do you think it will take? To buy the house? A few weeks, once we find the right property. To set up the trust and create the backstory? Maybe a month or two. To execute the plan? David paused, considering. I'd say we're looking at about 6 months from start to finish. 6 months felt like a lifetime, but it also felt like exactly the right amount of time to plan something this elaborate. I thought about my mother's shocked face when she realized what had happened, about the moment when she understood that every assumption she'd made about my life had been wrong. What about the jewelry business? I asked. Do I keep working at the boutique? That's up to you, David said, but I'd suggest maintaining the status quo for now. The more normal our life appears, the more shocking the revelation will be. So we just keep pretending to struggle? We keep living the way we've been living, David corrected. Which isn't struggling, by the way. We've been happy. He was right. We had been happy. Our small apartment, our simple lifestyle, our quiet evenings together, none of it had felt like struggling to me. It had felt like building something together, like creating a foundation for whatever came next. I love you, I said suddenly, overwhelmed by the realization that I'd married exactly the right person. I love you too, David replied, leaning across the table to kiss me. And I love that you're willing to pull off the most elaborate practical joke in history just to make a point to your mother. It's not a practical joke, I said, though I was laughing as I said it. It's a demonstration of success. It's both, David said, and it's going to be perfect. I spent the rest of that evening in a daze, oscillating between excitement and disbelief. David had returned to his trading screens, but I could see him glancing at real estate listings between analyzing market trends. The casual way he'd revealed his financial success still felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Saw your car in the driveway earlier. Did you stop by? I was at Margaret's and must have missed you." I stared at the message, marveling at how easily she could lie. She hadn't been at Mrs. Henderson's house. Mrs. Henderson had been at ours. But this was typical of my mother's approach to uncomfortable situations. Rewrite the narrative to avoid accountability. "Everything okay?" David asked, noticing my expression. "Just my mother," I said, showing him the text. "She's pretending she wasn't home when I came by." David read the message and shook his head. "She knows you heard her." "Probably," I agreed, "but she's giving herself plausible deniability. Are you going to respond?" I thought about it for a moment, then typed back, "No worries, Mom. I'll catch up with you soon." It wasn't a lie, exactly. I would catch up with her, just not in the way she expected. The next morning, I woke up wondering if the previous evening's conversation had been some kind of elaborate dream. But David was already at his computer, and when I approached with coffee, I could see he was researching real estate attorneys. "Morning," he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I've been thinking about the trust structure. We need someone who specializes in estate planning and anonymous gifting. Anonymous gifting is a real thing?" "Very real," David confirmed. "Wealthy people do it all the time for tax reasons, or to avoid publicity, or to prevent family drama. We'll just be doing it for slightly different reasons." I settled into my usual spot at the kitchen table, watching David work. There was something different about him today, an energy I hadn't seen before. He'd always been focused and determined, but this felt more purposeful, more personal. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course." "Why now? I mean, my mother has been saying things like this for years. Why are you choosing to act on it now?" David paused his typing and turned to face me. "Because yesterday was the first time I had the means to do something about it. And because I'm tired of watching her hurt you." "She's always hurt me," I pointed out. "It's kind of her thing." "I know," David said quietly. "And I should have said something sooner. I should have defended you more directly. But I was afraid that if I confronted her, she'd just take it out on you later." He was probably right about that. My mother had a long history of retaliating against people who challenged her, and she was particularly skilled at making her retaliation look like concerned parenting. So instead of confronting her, I said, "You're going to buy her a house." "I'm going to buy her a house," David confirmed, "and then I'm going to let her discover that the unemployed loser she's been worried about has just given her the most expensive gift she's ever received." "You're not unemployed," I said automatically, "and you're definitely not a loser." "I know that, you know that. But your mother doesn't know that, and she's been very vocal about her opinions, so we're going to educate her." I loved the way he said "we." From the moment I'd met David, he'd treated our relationship as a true partnership, but this felt like a new level of commitment. He wasn't just supporting me. He was actively working to change the dynamic that had been hurting me for years. "What if she doesn't accept the house?" I asked. "What if she's suspicious?" "She'll accept it," David said confidently. "Your mother likes nice things, and she's not going to turn down $1 million condo because she's suspicious about where it came from." $1 million? I repeated, the numbers still feeling abstract to me. "Probably closer to 900,000, David said, pulling up a listing on his screen. "But yes, we're talking about a substantial investment." I looked at the photos again, the marble, the hardwood, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. It was exactly the kind of place my mother had always dreamed of, the kind of home she'd driven past slowly when I was a child, wondering aloud what it would be like to live somewhere so beautiful. "She's going to love it," I said. "She's going to love it," David agreed. And then she's going to have to confront the fact that it came from us. What do you think she'll do when she finds out? David was quiet for a moment, considering. I think she'll be shocked. I think she'll be embarrassed. And I think, for the first time in your life, she'll have to acknowledge that she was wrong about something important. My mother doesn't acknowledge being wrong, I said. She's physically incapable of it. We'll see, David said. People can surprise you when they're forced to confront reality. I hoped he was right, but I'd been dealing with my mother's selective relationship with reality for 32 years. She had an impressive ability to rationalize away anything that didn't fit her preferred narrative. So what's the first step? I asked. I've got appointments with 3 different attorneys this week, David said. I want to find someone who can help us structure this properly, both legally and strategically. And then? Then we start looking at properties. We need to find something that will really appeal to your mother, something that represents everything she's ever wanted in a home. I know exactly what she wants, I said. She's been describing her dream house to me since I was 12 years old. Perfect, David said. You can be our interior design consultant. The phrase our interior design consultant made me smile. David had a way of making even the most outrageous plans sound reasonable and well organized. I should probably go to work, I said, glancing at the clock. Sarah's expecting me at the boutique by 10. How's that going, by the way? David asked. Are you happy there? I considered the question. Sarah's boutique was a lovely place to work. High-end clothing and accessories, sophisticated clientele, flexible hours that allowed me to work on my jewelry business. But I'd never thought of it as a career, more as a pleasant way to contribute to our household income while I built my own business. I'm happy enough, I said. It's not my passion, but it's not terrible either. What is your passion? David asked. Besides jewelry design? I don't know, I admitted. I used to think I knew, but now I'm not sure. Everything feels like it's in flux. That's okay, David said. You don't have to have everything figured out. We have time to explore what you really want to do. We have time was another phrase that was going to take getting used to. For the past 3 years, I'd been operating under the assumption that time was a limited resource, that David and I needed to figure out our careers and our finances quickly before we ran out of options. Now, apparently, we had the luxury of patience. I'll see you tonight, I said, kissing him goodbye. See you tonight, he replied. And Jessica? Don't mention any of this to anyone yet. We need to be careful about who knows what until we're ready to move forward. I won't say anything, I promised. But David? This is really happening, right? We're really going to do this? We're really going to do this, David confirmed. Your mother is going to get her dream house, and she's going to find out that it came from the daughter she thinks will never amount to anything. I drove to work with a smile on my face, feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a secret worth keeping, a plan worth executing, a future worth looking forward to. The boutique was busy that morning, which was both a blessing and a curse. The constant stream of customers kept me distracted from thinking about David's revelation, but it also made the day feel endless. Every time I had a quiet moment, my mind would drift to thoughts of real estate listings and trust documents, and the look on my mother's face when she realized what had happened. You seem different today, Sarah observed during our lunch break. Good different. Like you've got some kind of secret. Just feeling optimistic, I said, which was true enough. About what? About the future, I replied. About possibilities I hadn't considered before. Sarah smiled. That's wonderful. You've seemed a bit stressed lately. It's nice to see you relaxed. If only she knew how unstressed I was about to become. The financial security that David had revealed meant I could stop worrying about our future, stop calculating every expense, stop feeling guilty about the money I spent on jewelry supplies. It meant I could focus on building my business without the constant anxiety about whether we could afford for me to pursue something that might not generate immediate income. How's the jewelry business going? Sarah asked as if reading my thoughts. Really well, actually, I said. I've got more orders than I can handle right now. That's a good problem to have, Sarah said. Are you thinking about expanding? Maybe, I said. I'm still figuring out what I want to do long term. Well, if you ever decide to leave the boutique to focus on jewelry full-time, just give me plenty of notice. You're the best assistant I've ever had. The compliment made me smile, but it also made me think about the choices I'd been making by default rather than by design. I'd taken the job at the boutique because I needed income, not because I loved retail. I'd been developing my jewelry business slowly and carefully because I couldn't afford to take risks, not because I wanted to move slowly. What would I do if money wasn't a factor? What would I choose if I could choose anything? The questions followed me through the rest of my workday, mixing with thoughts of my mother's shocked face and David's hidden success. By the time I got home, I felt like I was living in a completely different world than the one I'd woken up in. David was on a phone call when I walked in, speaking to someone about trust structures and tax implications. He waved at me but continued his conversation, taking notes on a legal pad covered with diagrams and numbers. Yes, I understand the benefits of the charitable remainder trust, he was saying, but I'm not sure that's the right structure for what we're trying to accomplish. I busied myself making dinner, half listening to his conversation and half thinking about the bizarre turn my life had taken. 24 hours ago, I'd been worried about our grocery budget. Now I was overhearing discussions about trust funds and charitable donations. That was the second attorney, David said when he hung up. I'm not impressed with his approach. What's wrong with his approach? He's too focused on tax minimization and not focused enough on privacy and control. We need someone who understands that this is about more than just moving money around. It's about making a statement, I said. Exactly, David agreed. And the statement only works if it's delivered correctly. We ate dinner while David explained the different legal structures he'd learned about, the pros and cons of various approaches, the timeline for setting up the necessary paperwork. It was like getting a crash course in estate planning. Except the estate belonged to us, and the plan was more elaborate than anything I'd ever imagined. The third attorney wants to meet with both of us, David said as we cleaned up. She thinks it's important that you're involved in the planning process, since it's your family we're dealing with. Makes sense, I said. When's the meeting? Tomorrow at 2. Can you get away from the boutique? I'll ask Sarah to cover for me. She owes me a favor anyway. Perfect, David said. And Jessica? I think we should start looking at properties this weekend. The sooner we find the right place, the sooner we can start making this happen. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. I was ready to stop being my mother's disappointment and start being her benefactor. I was ready to stop defending my choices and start demonstrating their success. I was ready to stop being underestimated and start being acknowledged. Most of all, I was ready to see what happened when the unemployed son-in-law my mother had been criticizing revealed himself to be the most generous person she'd ever encountered. The transformation was about to begin, and I couldn't wait to see how it ended. The attorney's office felt like stepping into a different world entirely, one where mahogany bookshelves lined the walls and Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Michelle Rodriguez had come highly recommended by David's research, specializing in what she called complex family financial arrangements, with a client list that apparently included several celebrities and tech entrepreneurs who valued their privacy above all else. So let me understand this correctly, Michelle said, reviewing the notes David had emailed her in advance. You want to purchase a high-end property, place it in a trust, and gift it to your mother-in-law without her initially knowing the source of the gift. That's correct, David replied, his voice steady and professional in a way that still surprised me. We want to ensure complete anonymity until we choose to reveal ourselves. Michelle nodded thoughtfully, making notes on her legal pad. And the purpose of this anonymity is to allow the recipient to enjoy the gift without any preconceived notions about the givers. Exactly, I said, finding my voice. My mother has very strong opinions about our financial situation, and we believe those opinions would interfere with her ability to accept or appreciate the gift. Interesting, Michelle mused. I've handled similar cases, though usually the motivation is tax avoidance or publicity concerns. Your situation is more personal. Very personal, David confirmed. We need this to be bulletproof from a legal standpoint. But we also need it to be convincing from a human psychology standpoint. Michelle leaned back in her chair, studying us both carefully. I have to ask, and please don't take offense, but are you certain you can afford this? The properties you're looking at represent a substantial investment, and I want to make sure you're not overextending yourselves for emotional reasons. David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a portfolio of documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements, investment summaries, trading records spanning the past 2 years. He placed them on Michelle's desk with the casual confidence of someone who was accustomed to proving his financial stability. These are my primary trading accounts, he said. I have additional holdings that aren't reflected here, but this should give you a sense of our financial position. Michelle's eyebrows rose as she reviewed the documents. I watched her expression shift from professional skepticism to genuine surprise, then to what looked like impressed respect. Mr. Chen, she said, using David's last name with a new level of formality. I have to say, your trading performance is extraordinary. These returns are well above market averages. I've been fortunate, David replied, though I knew fortune had little to do with it. I'd watched him work, seen the hours he spent analyzing market trends and economic indicators, witnessed the careful research that went into every trade. More than fortunate, Michelle said, continuing to review the statements. You clearly have a sophisticated understanding of market dynamics. With returns like these, you could easily afford the property purchase without impacting your overall financial stability. That's what we hoped to confirm, I said. We don't want this to be a reckless decision driven by emotion. It's not reckless from a financial perspective, Michelle assured me. From a personal perspective, well, that's not my area of expertise. But I can certainly help you structure this in a way that achieves your goals. She spent the next hour explaining various trust structures, the benefits and drawbacks of each approach, the legal requirements for anonymous gifting. Her recommendation was something called a discretionary trust, which would allow us to maintain complete control over the property while legally transferring ownership to my mother. The beauty of this structure, Michelle explained, is that your mother becomes the beneficiary of the trust, but she doesn't necessarily need to know who established it. We can create a plausible backstory about a distant relative or family friend, complete with documentation that would satisfy any reasonable inquiry. How detailed can this backstory be? David asked. Very detailed, Michelle replied. I work with a genealogist who specializes in creating family histories for estate planning purposes. She can trace fictional family connections back several generations, complete with birth certificates, marriage records, even old newspaper clippings if necessary. The level of sophistication available for our plan was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. We weren't just buying a house, we were creating an entire fictional narrative to support the gift. What about ongoing expenses? I asked. Property taxes, homeowners association fees, maintenance costs. All handled by the trust, Michelle said. We'll establish an endowment that covers all anticipated expenses for at least 10 years. Your mother will never receive a bill related to the property. And when we decide to reveal the truth? David asked. That's entirely up to you, Michelle said. The trust documents will show that you're the original funders, so the information will be available whenever you choose to share it. Until then, your mother simply knows that she's been selected as the beneficiary of a generous trust established by someone who cared about her welfare. We spent another hour working through details, signing initial paperwork, discussing timelines. By the time we left Michelle's office, we had a concrete plan and a legal framework that would protect us while making our gift possible. I can't believe we're actually doing this, I said as we walked to our car. Having second thoughts? David asked. No, I said quickly. Just amazed that it's possible. I mean, this morning I was selling jewelry at a boutique, and now I'm involved in setting up a trust fund. You're still selling jewelry at a boutique, David pointed out. That part of your life hasn't changed. But everything else has, I said. Everything feels different now that I know what we're capable of. David stopped walking and turned to face me. Jessica, I need you to understand something. The money changes what we can do, but it doesn't change who we are. We're still the same people who fell in love in that tiny apartment, who built something together from nothing. I know, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. Money might not change who we were, but it certainly changed how others saw us, and it definitely changed what was possible for our future. The reason I kept this quiet for so long, David continued, is that I wanted to make sure our relationship could handle financial success. I've seen money destroy couples who weren't prepared for it. Are we prepared for it? I asked. I think so, David said. But we need to be careful. We need to make sure we're making decisions for the right reasons. And buying my mother a house is for the right reasons? David smiled. Buying your mother a house is for complicated reasons. But I think they're good reasons. That evening, we started seriously looking at properties online. David had printed out listings for every available unit at Willowbrook Estates, and we spread them across our kitchen table like we were planning a military campaign. This one has the best view, I said, pointing to a corner unit on the 8th floor. She's always loved golf courses, and she'd be able to see the entire 18th hole from her living room. It's also the most expensive, David noted, checking the listing price. $1.2 million. Is that a problem? Not financially, David said. But I want to make sure we choose something she'll actually love, not just something expensive. I studied the photos more carefully, trying to imagine my mother's reaction to each property. The corner unit was impressive, but it might be too large for her. She'd lived alone since my father's death 5 years ago, and she'd often complained about the maintenance required for their old house. What about this one? I asked, indicating a smaller unit on the 6th floor. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, still has a golf course view, but more manageable for one person. $900,000, David read. That seems more reasonable. Reasonable is a relative term at this point, I said, laughing at the absurdity of our conversation. 6 months ago, $900,000 would have seemed impossible. Now we're calling it reasonable. Context is everything, David agreed. Should we schedule some viewings for this weekend? Definitely, I said. I want to see these places in person before we make any decisions. And I want to make sure we understand exactly what we're buying, David added. Not just the property, but the lifestyle, the community, the ongoing commitments. Saturday morning found us dressed in our best clothes, driving through the gates of Willowbrook Estates with an appointment to tour 3 different properties. The development was even more impressive in person than in photos, with perfectly manicured landscapes, decorative fountains, and a clubhouse that looked like something from a luxury resort. Our real estate agent, Patricia Williams, was exactly what I'd expected. Impeccably dressed, professionally friendly, and clearly accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients. She'd been briefed on our situation by Michelle's office, understanding that we were looking for an investment property with specific requirements. The first unit we'll see is on the 4th floor, Patricia explained as we rode the elevator up. It's one of our most popular floor plans, with an open concept living area and panoramic views of the golf course. The moment we walked into the first condo, I knew my mother would love it. The kitchen was a masterpiece of marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, the kind of space she'd always dreamed of having. The living room was spacious but not overwhelming, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the manicured fairways below. The master bedroom has a walk-in closet and ensuite bathroom, Patricia continued, leading us through the space. There's also a guest bedroom that many of our residents use as an office or craft room. A craft room. I could practically see my mother setting up her sewing machine and fabric collection in the smaller bedroom, finally having a dedicated space for her hobbies. What are the homeowners association fees? David asked, ever practical. $450 monthly, Patricia replied. That covers exterior maintenance, landscaping, the fitness center, and access to the golf course for residents. Golf course access is included? I asked, surprised. Absolutely, Patricia said. Residents can play unlimited golf, use the driving range, and book the private dining room for special occasions. My mother had always wanted to learn golf, but had never been able to afford membership at a country club. This would give her everything she'd ever wanted and more. The seller is motivated, Patricia continued, as we finished touring the first unit. They've already relocated to Florida and are eager to close quickly. We toured 2 more properties, but I found myself comparing everything to the first condo. It had the perfect combination of elegance and practicality, luxury and livability. It was exactly what my mother would choose if she had unlimited resources and perfect taste. "What do you think?" David asked as we drove home after the viewings. "The first one," I said without hesitation. "It's perfect for her." "I agree," David said. It felt right the moment we walked in. "So we're really going to do this," I said, the reality of our decisions settling over me. "We're going to buy my mother a $900,000 condo." "We're going to buy your mother her dream home," David corrected. "The price is just a number." "A very large number," I pointed out. "A number we can afford," David reminded me. "And a number that represents something important." "What does it represent?" "It represents the fact that your mother was wrong about us," David said. "It represents our success, our partnership, our ability to take care of the people we love, even when they don't believe in us." "She's going to be so shocked," I said, trying to imagine my mother's reaction when she learned the truth. "She's going to be more than shocked," David predicted. "She's going to have to confront every assumption she's made about our life together." Monday morning, we submitted an offer on the condo. Patricia had warned us that other buyers were interested, but David's ability to provide proof of funds and offer a cash purchase with no financing contingencies made our offer extremely attractive to the sellers. By Wednesday, we had a signed purchase agreement. "Congratulations," Michelle said when we met in her office to finalize the trust paperwork. "You're now the proud owners of a very expensive piece of real estate." "Technically, the trust owns it," David corrected. "Technically, yes," Michelle agreed. "But you control the trust, so practically speaking, it's yours." Now we need to work on the backstory. The genealogist Michelle had recommended, Dr. Sarah Chen, was a small woman with an enormous laptop and an impressive collection of family history resources. She'd already begun researching my mother's family tree, looking for plausible connections that could justify the inheritance. "Your mother's maiden name was Patterson," Dr. Chen said, consulting her notes. "There was a Patterson family that emigrated from Ireland in the 1920s and eventually settled in California. One branch of that family did quite well in real estate development." "So we're saying my mother inherited from a distant cousin?" I asked. "More specifically, we're saying she was named as a beneficiary in the will of Harold Patterson, who was her father's second cousin. Harold never married, had no children, and remembered your mother fondly from a family reunion they attended together in 1995. "But there was no family reunion in 1995, I pointed out. "There was now," Dr. Chen said with a smile. "I've created documentation showing that Harold organized a Patterson family gathering in San Diego that year. Your mother attended with your father, and Harold was impressed by her kindness and grace." The level of detail in the fictional backstory was remarkable. Dr. Chen had created birth certificates, marriage records, property deeds, even a fictional obituary for Harold Patterson that would appear in California newspapers following his death from natural causes. "What if my mother tries to verify this information?" I asked. "She'll find exactly what she expects to find," Dr. Chen assured me. "The obituary will mention her by name as a surviving cousin. There will be records of Harold's real estate investments, his charitable giving, his decision to leave his estate to family members he'd reconnected with later in life." "This is incredibly thorough," David said, reviewing the documents Dr. Chen had prepared. "It has to be," Dr. Chen replied. "People are naturally suspicious of unexpected inheritances. The story has to be believable, verifiable, and emotionally satisfying." "Emotionally satisfying?" I asked. "Your mother needs to feel like she deserved this inheritance," Dr. Chen explained. "If she thinks it's random or arbitrary, she'll be suspicious. But if she believes that Harold Patterson was genuinely impressed by her character and remembered her kindness, she'll accept the gift as recognition of her worth." The irony wasn't lost on me. We were creating a fictional scenario in which my mother was valued and appreciated by a relative she'd never actually met, while in reality, she was being valued and appreciated by a daughter and son-in-law she consistently underestimated. "When do we tell her?" I asked Michelle. "I'd recommend waiting until after she's moved in and settled," Michelle replied. "Give her time to enjoy the property, to invite her friends over, to feel comfortable in her new life. Then, when she's fully committed to the reality of her good fortune, you can reveal the truth." "How long should we wait?" "At least 6 months," Michelle suggested. "Maybe longer. You want her to feel like the inheritance is a permanent part of her life, not something that could be taken away. The closing on the condo was scheduled for the following Friday. David and I would take ownership of the property, then immediately transfer it to the trust, then have the trust contact my mother about her inheritance. The process was complex but legally sound. "I'm nervous," I admitted to David the night before closing. "About what, specifically?" "About everything," I said. "About spending this much money, about lying to my mother, about what happens when she finds out the truth." David sat beside me on our couch, taking my hands in his. "We can still change our minds," he said. "We can cancel the closing, withdraw from the trust, pretend this never happened. Do you want to change your mind?" "No," David said firmly. "I think this is the right thing to do. But only if you're comfortable with it." I thought about my mother's voice as she described my life to Mrs. Henderson, the casual cruelty in her assessment of my choices. I thought about all the times she'd made me feel small, all the ways she'd dismissed my accomplishments and criticized my marriage. "I'm comfortable with it," I said. "I want her to understand what she's been wrong about." "Then we'll go through with it," David said. "Tomorrow we become your mother's anonymous benefactors." "Tomorrow everything changes," I said. "Tomorrow everything changes," David agreed. "And I think it's going to change for the better." The closing took place in a conference room at the title company, with more paperwork than I'd ever seen in my life. David and I signed dozens of documents, transferred funds from his trading accounts, and officially became the owners of a luxury condominium we would never live in. "Congratulations," the title agent said, handing us the keys to the property. "You're now the proud owners of Unit 4B at Willowbrook Estates." "Thank you," David replied, pocketing the keys with a satisfied smile. "What now?" I asked as we walked to our car. "Now we transfer ownership to the trust," David said. "And then Michelle's office contacts your mother with the wonderful news about her inheritance." "And then we wait," I said. "And then we wait," David confirmed, "for your mother to discover that her unemployed son-in-law has just made her the luckiest woman in the county." The call from Michelle's office to my mother was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend in a state of nervous excitement, alternating between confidence in our plan and anxiety about its execution. David remained calm and focused, treating the whole endeavor like one of his trading strategies, carefully planned, properly executed, with clear objectives and measurable outcomes. "She's going to call you," David predicted Sunday evening, probably within an hour of hearing from the attorney. "What should I say?" "Act surprised," David advised. "Act happy for her. Ask lots of questions about the inheritance, but don't seem too knowledgeable about the details." "I'm not sure I can pull off that kind of acting," I said. "You'll be fine," David assured me. "Just remember, you're supposed to be hearing about this for the first time." Monday morning arrived with unusual clarity, as if the universe had decided to provide perfect weather for the beginning of our elaborate plan. I was at the boutique, helping a customer select a scarf, when my phone rang with my mother's number. "Jessica," she said, her voice higher pitched than usual. "You are not going to believe what just happened." "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping away from the customer to take the call privately. "Nothing's wrong," my mother said quickly. "Something wonderful has happened. Something completely unexpected." "What are you talking about?" "I just got a call from an attorney in California," my mother said, her words tumbling together in excitement. "Apparently, I've inherited property from a distant cousin I barely remember meeting." "What?" I said, putting appropriate surprise into my voice. "That's amazing! What kind of property?" "A condominium," my mother said, "at Willowbrook Estates. You know, that development with the golf course that I've always admired." "The really expensive one?" I asked, as if I didn't know exactly how expensive it was. $900,000, my mother said, her voice filled with wonder. "Can you believe it? $900,000 worth of real estate, just given to me by someone I met once at a family reunion." "Who was this cousin?" I asked. "Harold Patterson," my mother said. "He was my father's second cousin, apparently. I vaguely remember meeting him at some family gathering years ago, but I never imagined he'd remember me, let alone leave me something in his will." "That's incredible, Mom," I said, genuinely happy to hear the excitement in her voice. "When do you get to see the property?" The attorney is sending me keys and documentation, my mother said. I can take possession any time after Wednesday. Jessica, I'm going to live in Willowbrook Estates. I'm going to have my own golf course. I'm so happy for you, I said, and I meant it. Whatever complicated motivations had led to this moment, hearing genuine joy in my mother's voice made everything feel worthwhile. I have to call Margaret and tell her, my mother said. She's going to be so surprised. I'm sure she will be, I said, thinking about Mrs. Henderson's reaction to learning that the daughter who would never amount to anything had just facilitated her mother's entry into the most exclusive community in town. I should go, my mother said. I have so many people to call, so many arrangements to make. Congratulations, Mom, I said. You deserve this. Thank you, sweetheart, my mother replied, using an endearment she hadn't called me in years. I'll call you later with more details. After hanging up, I stood in the boutique's back room for several minutes, processing what had just happened. The plan was working exactly as we'd hoped. My mother was thrilled, unsuspicious, and already making plans to enjoy her new life. Everything okay? Sarah asked, finding me staring at my phone. My mother just inherited a condo at Willowbrook Estates, I said, practicing the story I'd be telling for the next several months. The golf course development? Sarah asked, impressed. Those places are worth a fortune. $900,000, I said, still marveling at how easily the truth could be hidden in plain sight. That's wonderful, Sarah said. Your mother must be thrilled. She is, I confirmed. She's wanted to live somewhere like that for as long as I can remember. Well, good for her, Sarah said. It's nice when good things happen to good people. I smiled and nodded, thinking about how true that statement was, even if Sarah didn't understand the full context of what had just occurred. Good things were indeed happening to good people, just not in the way anyone expected. That evening, David and I celebrated quietly at our kitchen table, sharing takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. Phase 1 complete, David said, raising his glass in a toast. Phase 1 complete, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. She sounded happier than I've heard her in years. Good, David said. That's exactly what we wanted. And now we wait for Phase 2, I said. Phase 2 is going to take patience, David warned. We need to let her get comfortable with her new life before we reveal the truth. How will we know when the time is right? We'll know, David said confidently. Trust me, we'll know. As we finished our celebration dinner, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman struggling with her mother's disapproval and her husband's mysterious work habits. Now I was a woman who had just purchased a luxury condominium for the mother who had consistently underestimated her worth. David, I said suddenly. Yes? Thank you, I said. For seeing what this could mean, for having the courage to do something about it, for making this possible. Thank you, David replied, for trusting me with something this important, for being willing to take this leap with me. Are you ready for what comes next? I asked. I'm ready for whatever comes next, David said. As long as we face it together. Together, I agreed, feeling more confident about our future than I had in years. The next morning brought a text from my mother with photos of her new keys and a legal document bearing the official seal of Michelle's law firm. The photos showed my mother's hands holding the keys to what was now her property, and her expression in the selfie she'd included was pure joy. I can't wait for you to see it, the text read. This is going to change everything. She had no idea how right she was. This was indeed going to change everything, just not in the way she expected. Soon, very soon, she would discover that the unemployed son-in-law she'd been worried about had just given her the most generous gift she'd ever received. And when that moment came, we would finally have the conversation we'd been avoiding for years. The conversation about worth, about success, about the choices people make and the lives they build together. I was looking forward to that conversation, more than I'd looked forward to anything, in a very long time. 3 weeks after my mother received the keys to her new condo, she called me with an invitation that caught me completely off guard. Her voice carried a lightness I hadn't heard in years, almost girlish in its excitement. Jessica, you simply must come see the place, she said, speaking faster than usual. I've been decorating, and I think you'll be amazed at what I've accomplished. Can you and David come for dinner this Saturday? The request was so unprecedented that I almost dropped my phone. My mother had never invited David and me for dinner, had never shown interest in having us visit her home for any social purpose. Our interactions had always been obligation-based, brief encounters that felt more like inspections than visits. You want us to come for dinner? I repeated, needing confirmation that I'd heard correctly. Of course I do, my mother replied, as if she regularly entertained us. I have this beautiful new dining room, and I've been dying to use it properly. Besides, I want David to see what real success looks like. The comment stung, even though I knew it was meant casually rather than maliciously. My mother had no idea that David had personally funded her real success, that every beautiful detail she was eager to show off had been carefully selected and purchased by the man she considered a financial burden. We'd love to come, I said, managing to keep my voice steady. What time works for you? 6 o'clock, my mother said. I'm planning to make my famous pot roast, the one your father always loved. I finally have a kitchen worthy of proper cooking. After hanging up, I sat in my car outside the boutique, trying to process the emotional complexity of what had just happened. My mother was genuinely happy, more enthusiastic than I'd heard her in years, and she wanted to share that happiness with us. The irony was overwhelming. How did it go? David asked when I called him immediately afterward. She invited us for dinner on Saturday, I said. She wants to show off her new place. That's good, right? David asked, though I could hear uncertainty in his voice. I think so, I said. It's just strange, hearing her so excited about something we gave her while she has no idea we were involved. It's exactly what we hoped would happen, David reminded me. She's enjoying the gift without any complicated feelings about accepting help from us. I know, I said. It's just surreal. Are you nervous about going there? Terrified, I admitted. What if I say something that gives us away? What if she asks questions I can't answer? What if I can't handle seeing her enjoying something we provided while she continues to think poorly of us? We'll be careful, David said. We'll ask appropriate questions, show proper interest, and remember that we're supposed to be learning about this inheritance for the first time. And if she makes more comments about your employment status? Then I'll bite my tongue and remind myself that she'll understand the truth eventually, David said. We've waited this long. We can wait a little longer. Saturday evening arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear with the kind of golden light that made everything look like a painting. David and I drove through the gates of Willowbrook Estates with genuine curiosity about how my mother had settled into her new environment. The development looked even more impressive than I remembered from our earlier visits. The landscaping had been updated for fall, with carefully arranged chrysanthemums and ornamental kale creating stunning displays throughout the community. Golf carts driven by well-dressed residents moved along the cart paths, and the clubhouse buzzed with activity as the dinner crowd arrived for Saturday evening service. It really is beautiful here, David observed as we parked in front of my mother's building. It is, I agreed. I can see why she's so excited about living here. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt longer than usual, my anxiety building with each floor we passed. When the doors opened and we walked down the hallway toward Unit 4B, I found myself holding my breath. My mother opened the door before we could knock, as if she'd been watching for our arrival. She looked radiant, in a way I hadn't seen since before my father's death, wearing a new dress that complemented her figure and holding herself with renewed confidence. "Welcome to my new home," she said, embracing me with genuine warmth before turning to David with a smile that actually reached her eyes. "David, I'm so glad you could join us. I've been looking forward to showing you what a well-appointed home looks like." The comment was typical of my mother, managing to be welcoming and insulting simultaneously, but David handled it with grace. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Patterson," he said. "We're excited to see what you've done with the place." "Please call me Linda," my mother said, surprising us both. She'd never given David permission to use her first name before. We're family, after all. The transformation of the condo was remarkable. In just 3 weeks, my mother had turned the elegant but sterile space into a warm, personal home that reflected her personality perfectly. She'd arranged her furniture to take advantage of the golf course views, hung family photos that I recognized from my childhood home, and added touches of color that made the space feel inviting rather than intimidating. "This is incredible, Mom," I said, and I meant it completely. "You've made it feel like home already." "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have the right space to work with," my mother replied, leading us through the living room toward the kitchen. I never realized how much the limitations of my old house were holding me back. The kitchen was a masterpiece of organization and style. My mother had filled it with the kind of high-end appliances and cookware she'd always wanted but never been able to afford. The marble countertops were covered with evidence of serious meal preparation, and something that smelled absolutely delicious was roasting in the oven. "I've been experimenting with new recipes," my mother said, noticing my attention to the elaborate dinner preparations. "When you have a kitchen like this, you feel inspired to cook properly." "It smells amazing," David said, and I could hear genuine appreciation in his voice rather than polite obligation. "Family pot roast recipe," my mother said proudly. "Your father's favorite, Jessica. I haven't made it in years because my old oven was so unreliable." We moved through the rest of the condo, with my mother enthusiastically explaining every detail of her decorating choices. The guest bedroom had been converted into an office and craft room, exactly as Patricia had predicted. My mother had set up her sewing machine and organized her fabric collection with the kind of care that spoke to years of dreaming about having adequate space for her hobbies. "This is where I've been working on my quilting project," she said, showing us an intricate pattern spread across a cutting table that was clearly expensive and perfectly suited to her needs. "I've always wanted to try complex piecing, but I never had room to keep a project laid out properly." "It's beautiful work," David said, examining the quilt pieces with genuine interest. "How long does something like this take to complete?" "Months," my mother replied, obviously pleased by his attention. "But now I have the space and the time to work on projects that really matter to me." "You seem happier than I've seen you in years," I observed, and it was true. The stress lines around my mother's eyes had softened, and she moved through her new home with the kind of easy confidence that comes from feeling truly comfortable in your environment. "I am happier," my mother said simply. "I feel like I've been given a second chance at the kind of life I always wanted but never thought I could have." The comment hit me with unexpected emotional force. My mother had always been critical and demanding, but underneath that behavior had been disappointment with her own circumstances, frustration with the gap between her dreams and her reality. Now, suddenly that gap had been eliminated. "Tell us more about this cousin who left you the inheritance," David said as we settled in the living room with wine before dinner. It must have been quite a surprise to hear from his attorney. "Harold Patterson," my mother said, settling into her new armchair with obvious satisfaction. "I barely remembered him, to be honest. We met at a family reunion in California years ago, but I never imagined I'd made such an impression." "What was he like?" I asked, curious to hear how my mother had processed the fictional backstory Dr. Chen had created. "Quiet, thoughtful," my mother said, clearly drawing on half-remembered impressions from a meeting that had never actually occurred. "He asked a lot of questions about my life, my interests, my dreams for the future. I thought he was just being polite, but apparently he remembered our conversation." "He must have been quite successful to afford a place like this," David observed. "Real estate development," my mother said. "The attorney told me he built shopping centers throughout California and invested the profits wisely. Never married, no children, so he decided to leave his estate to family members who had impressed him with their character." The way my mother told the story, she sounded like she genuinely believed every detail. Dr. Chen's fictional Harold Patterson had become real in my mother's mind, a benevolent relative who had recognized her worth and rewarded her accordingly. "It sounds like he was a good judge of character," David said, and there was something in his tone that made me glance at him sharply. "I think he was," my mother agreed. "He told me that evening that I reminded him of his own mother, someone who had worked hard all her life and deserved to enjoy the finer things." "Well, you certainly deserve to enjoy this place," I said. "You've worked hard your entire life." "I have," my mother said with satisfaction. "And now I'm finally being rewarded for that hard work." Dinner was served in my mother's new dining room, at a table that could easily seat 8 people. She'd set it with china and crystal that I recognized from special occasions during my childhood, pieces that had been stored away for years, because her old dining room hadn't been elegant enough to showcase them properly. The meal itself was extraordinary. My mother had always been a good cook, but the combination of professional-grade appliances and renewed enthusiasm had elevated her cooking to restaurant quality. The pot roast was tender and flavorful, accompanied by vegetables that had been prepared with obvious care and attention. "This is incredible," David said, and his appreciation was clearly genuine rather than polite. "I can see why this was your father's favorite recipe." Quote, "Thank you," my mother replied, visibly pleased by the compliment. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you have the right tools and the right environment." As we ate, my mother told us stories about her new neighbors, the activities available at the clubhouse, her plans for learning to play golf, now that she had access to the course. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely happy to see her so content. "The community here is wonderful," she said. "Everyone is so accomplished, so interesting. I've already joined the book club and signed up for golf lessons." "Golf lessons?" I asked, surprised. My mother had always claimed she had no interest in sports. "Why not?" she said with a laugh. "I live on a golf course now. I might as well learn to play." "That's a great attitude," David said. "It's never too late to try new things." "Exactly," my mother agreed. "I feel like I've been given a new lease on life, and I intend to make the most of it." As the evening progressed, I noticed subtle changes in how my mother interacted with David. She asked about his work with genuine curiosity rather than skeptical concern, listened to his responses without the dismissive attitude I'd grown accustomed to, and even laughed at his jokes. It was as if her improved circumstances had made her more generous toward everyone around her. "David, I have to admit something," my mother said as we finished dessert. "I may have been too quick to judge your career choices in the past." David and I exchanged a quick glance, both of us wondering where this was heading. "I'm not sure what you mean," David said carefully. "Well," my mother continued, "I've been thinking about Harold's story, about how he built his success through real estate investment and careful financial planning. It occurred to me that day trading might be similar to what he did, just with different assets." "There are some similarities," David agreed cautiously. "And living here, seeing how other successful people manage their finances, I'm beginning to understand that there are many paths to prosperity." My mother continued. "Perhaps I was too narrow in my thinking." "That's very thoughtful of you to say," David replied. "I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I'm sorry if I seemed unsupportive of your choices," my mother said, addressing David directly. "I was worried about Jessica's future, but I may have been worrying unnecessarily. The apology was so unexpected that I felt tears welling up in my eyes." My mother had never apologized to David for anything, had never acknowledged that her concerns might have been misplaced. "Thank you," David said simply. "That means a lot to me." "Your family," my mother said firmly. "And families should support each other, especially during challenging times." "We appreciate that," I said, my voice slightly unsteady with emotion. After dinner, we moved back to the living room for coffee and continued conversation. My mother showed us photo albums from her first few weeks in the condo, pictures of her new neighbors, images of community events she'd attended. She'd clearly thrown herself into her new life with enthusiasm and was building relationships with remarkable speed. "I feel like I've finally found where I belong," she said as we prepared to leave. "This place, these people, this lifestyle, it all feels right in a way that nothing has felt right in years." "I'm so happy for you, Mom," I said, hugging her goodbye with genuine emotion. "Thank you both for coming," my mother said, embracing David as well. "I hope we can do this regularly now that I have a proper place to entertain." "We'd love that," David said, and I could hear that he meant it. As we drove home through the Willowbrook Estates gates, I found myself overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. I was thrilled to see my mother so happy, so confident, so generous in her interactions with us. But I was also struggling with the knowledge that her transformation was built on a deception we had carefully constructed. "That went better than I expected," David said once we were back on the main road. "It was amazing," I said. "She was like a completely different person." "She was herself," David corrected. "Just herself without the stress and disappointment that was weighing her down." "Do you think she meant what she said about supporting your career choices?" I think she meant it in the moment, David said. Whether she continues to mean it when she finds out the truth, well, that remains to be seen. Are you having doubts about revealing the truth? I asked. No, David said firmly. If anything, tonight convinced me that we made the right choice. She needed this gift, and she deserved to enjoy it without any complications about where it came from. But eventually she needs to know, I said. Eventually she needs to know, David agreed. But not yet. Let her enjoy this for a while longer. How much longer? I don't know, David said. Maybe until Christmas. That would give her almost 6 months to settle in completely. Christmas, I repeated, thinking about the timing. That would be quite a holiday surprise. It would be the ultimate gift, David said. The truth about who really values her and believes in her worth. Over the following weeks, my mother called me regularly with updates about her new life. She'd joined the women's auxiliary at the clubhouse, started taking cooking classes from a chef who visited the community monthly, and had indeed begun golf lessons with the course pro. I'm not very good yet, she told me during one of our phone calls, but I'm improving. The instructor says I have natural coordination. That's wonderful, I said. Are you enjoying it? More than I expected, my mother admitted. There's something very satisfying about hitting the ball cleanly. And the social aspect is lovely. I've met some fascinating women through the golf program. It sounds like you're building quite a social circle. I am, my mother said with obvious satisfaction. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of a community where I truly belong. David's trading continued to perform exceptionally well, with his monthly profits consistently exceeding our highest expectations. He'd begun to talk about additional investments, other ways we could use our growing wealth to create positive changes in the world around us. What would you think about setting up a scholarship fund? He asked one evening as we reviewed his latest trading statements. For who? Art students, David said. Students like you were, who have talent and passion but maybe not family support for their creative pursuits. The suggestion touched me deeply, both because it addressed something I cared about and because it showed David's growing confidence in making philanthropic plans. I love that idea, I said, but I'd want to be actively involved in selecting recipients, not just providing funding. Of course, David said. We could interview candidates together, maybe even mentor them as they develop their skills. You're talking about long-term commitments, I observed. I'm talking about building a legacy, David said, something that reflects our values and creates lasting positive impact. Our values, I repeated, liking the way that sounded. Partnership, creativity, supporting people who are underestimated, David explained. The things that matter to us. The things that brought us together, I added. Exactly. As November progressed toward December, David and I began seriously discussing the timing for revealing the truth to my mother. We'd originally planned to wait until Christmas, but her continued happiness and her improved treatment of both of us made the secret feel increasingly burdensome. She's invited us for Thanksgiving, I told David after another phone call from my mother. She wants to cook a full traditional dinner and have us stay the entire day. That's wonderful, David said. How do you feel about it? Excited, I said honestly. And guilty. She's being so generous with us, so welcoming, and she has no idea that we're the reason her life has changed. The reason her life has changed is that she deserved something better, David said. We just made it possible. When do we tell her? I asked directly. David was quiet for a moment considering. What would you think about Christmas Eve? He suggested. After she's had a chance to enjoy the holidays in her new home, after she's fully settled into her new life. Christmas Eve, I repeated, thinking about the timing. That's only about 6 weeks away. 6 weeks for her to enjoy the gift without complications, David said. And then the ultimate Christmas present, understanding where it really came from. What if she reacts badly, I asked. What if she's angry about the deception? Then we'll deal with that, David said. But I don't think she'll be angry. Surprised, maybe. Overwhelmed, probably. But not angry. You really think she'll understand why we did it this way? I think she'll understand that we did it out of love, David said. And I think she'll finally understand that her unemployed son-in-law has been more successful than she ever imagined possible. Thanksgiving at my mother's new condo was a revelation. She'd prepared an elaborate feast using her new kitchen to its full potential, setting the dining room table with flowers from the clubhouse garden and candles that cast warm light throughout the space. She'd invited us to arrive early and stay late, treating the day as a genuine celebration rather than an obligation. "I have so much to be thankful for this year," she said as we gathered around her table. "This beautiful home, new friends, new opportunities, and most importantly, family to share it all with." She looked directly at David as she said the word family, including him in a way she never had before. "I'm thankful for second chances," David said when it was his turn to share, "for opportunities to build something meaningful, and for people who believe in that vision." "I'm thankful for growth," I said carefully, "for relationships that can change and improve, and for discovering that people are capable of surprising you in the best possible ways." "Here's to surprising each other," my mother said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "To surprising each other," David and I echoed, and I felt the irony of the moment settle over me like a warm blanket. As the day progressed, I watched my mother with new eyes, seeing not just the critical woman who had made me feel inadequate for years, but also someone who had been struggling with her own disappointments and limitations. Her transformation over the past few months hadn't just been about having a nicer home, it had been about feeling valued, appreciated, worthy of good things. "You know," my mother said as we cleaned up after dinner, "I've been thinking about the future differently lately." "How so?" I asked. "I used to worry constantly about security, about having enough, about whether I was making the right choices," she said. "But now I feel like I have the freedom to focus on what really matters." "What really matters?" David asked. "Relationships," my mother said without hesitation. "Experiences. Contributing something positive to the world around me." "Those are good priorities," I said. "I've been thinking about volunteering," my mother continued. "The community here has several charitable programs, and I have skills that could be useful." "What kind of volunteering?" David asked. "Teaching sewing and quilting to underprivileged children," my mother said. "There's a program that brings kids from the city out here for art and life skills workshops." "That sounds perfect for you," I said, genuinely impressed by her choice. "I've always wanted to share my skills with young people," my mother said, "but I never felt like I had the stability or the resources to make that commitment." "And now you do," David observed. "Now I do," my mother agreed. "Thanks to Harold's generosity, I finally have the freedom to give back." The mention of Harold Patterson, the fictional cousin whose generosity was actually David's, reminded me again of the truth we were keeping from her. In just a few weeks, she would learn that her opportunity to volunteer, her newfound stability, her beautiful home, had all come from the son-in-law she had once considered a burden. "I'm proud of you, Mom," I said impulsively, "for building this new life, for embracing these opportunities, for thinking about ways to help others." "Thank you, sweetheart," my mother replied, using that endearment again. "That means more to me than you know." As David and I drove home that evening, we were both quiet for several miles, processing the emotional complexity of the day. "Christmas Eve," I said finally. "Christmas Eve," David confirmed. "It's time." "I'm nervous," I admitted. "I'm excited," David said. "I'm excited for her to understand the truth about us, about our relationship, about what we've been able to accomplish together." "What if it changes things between us?" "It will change things between us," David said, "but I think it will change them for the better." "You really believe that?" "I really believe that," David said. "Your mother has spent years underestimating us because she didn't understand what we were capable of. Soon she'll understand exactly what we're capable of." "And then what?" "And then," David said with a smile, "we'll finally be able to have honest conversations about our life, our choices, and our plans for the future." "Our plans for the future," I repeated, liking the sound of those words. "Starting with that scholarship fund," David said, "I think your mother might want to be involved in that project." "You think so?" "I think she'd love the opportunity to help young artists the way we wish someone had helped you," David said. "I think she'd embrace the chance to be part of something meaningful." "That would be amazing," I said, imagining my mother working alongside us to support aspiring artists. "Amazing is what's coming," David said confidently. "Amazing is what we've built together. And amazing is what happens when your mother finally understands the truth about the daughter and son-in-law she's been underestimating. Christmas Eve, I said again, this time with anticipation rather than anxiety. Christmas Eve, David agreed. The day everything changes for the better. Christmas Eve morning dawned crisp and bright, with fresh snow covering the grounds of Willowbrook Estates like a postcard scene. David and I had barely slept, both of us cycling through waves of anticipation and nervousness about what the day would bring. Today was the day we would finally tell my mother the truth about her inheritance, about Harold Patterson, about everything. Are you ready for this? David asked as we finished our coffee, both of us dressed more formally than usual for our visit. I don't think anyone can be ready for something like this, I replied, adjusting the small wrapped gift I'd prepared for my mother. Inside was a simple photo frame containing a picture of the three of us from Thanksgiving, but what mattered was the note I'd written to accompany it. She's going to understand, David said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. After everything that's happened these past few months, she's going to see that this was an act of love. I hope you're right, I said, though my stomach was still churning with anxiety. We'd planned our approach carefully. First, we'd enjoy Christmas Eve dinner with my mother, letting her have one last celebration in her beautiful home without any complicated knowledge. Then, after dessert and gifts, we'd ask her to sit down for an important conversation. David would explain about his trading success, and I would reveal our role in her inheritance. The drive to Willowbrook Estates felt both endless and too short. David played soft music on the radio, but neither of us spoke much, both lost in our own thoughts about how the evening might unfold. When we passed through the development's gates, decorated with elaborate Christmas garland and twinkling lights, the weight of what we were about to do settled over me completely. My mother greeted us at her door wearing a stunning red dress I'd never seen before, her face glowing with holiday excitement. She'd decorated her condo beautifully for Christmas, with a tree in the corner that sparkled with ornaments and lights, garland draped along the windows, and candles creating a warm, festive atmosphere throughout the space. "Merry Christmas, darlings," she said, embracing us both warmly. Come in, come in. I have champagne chilled, and dinner is almost ready." "This looks incredible, Mom," I said, taking in the elegant holiday decorations. "You've really outdone yourself." "I wanted everything to be perfect," she replied, leading us into the living room where a fire crackled in the fireplace. "This is my first Christmas in my new home, and I wanted it to be memorable." "It will definitely be memorable," David said, and I caught the double meaning in his words. We settled in the living room with champagne, admiring the view of the snow-covered golf course and the twinkling lights from other condos throughout the development. My mother was more animated than I'd ever seen her, telling us stories about the holiday parties she'd attended at the clubhouse, the new traditions she was establishing, the friends she'd made who had become like family. "Mrs. Wellington from down the hall invited me to join her family for Christmas morning," my mother said. "Can you imagine? They've taken me in like I've been part of their circle for years." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy that she'd found such welcoming community. "I keep thinking about Harold," my mother continued, her voice growing thoughtful. "How he somehow knew that this place would be perfect for me, that I'd thrive here. It's like he could see into my heart and understand exactly what I needed." The comment hit me with unexpected force. Harold Patterson had indeed seen into her heart, in a way, because David and I had created him to understand exactly what she needed. We'd given Harold our own insights about my mother's dreams and desires, making him the perfect benefactor because we knew her so well. "He must have been very perceptive," David said carefully. "He was," my mother agreed. "Sometimes I feel like he's still watching over me, making sure I make the most of this gift he's given me." Dinner was spectacular, even more elaborate than Thanksgiving. My mother had prepared crown roast with all the traditional accompaniments, using her beautiful china and crystal to create a table setting worthy of a magazine cover. Every detail had been carefully considered, from the centerpiece of white roses and pine branches to the individual place cards she'd handwritten for each of us. "This is restaurant quality," David said as we ate, and his appreciation was clearly genuine. "Having the right kitchen makes all the difference," my mother replied. I never realized how much my old appliances were limiting my cooking until I had access to professional-grade equipment. You seem like a completely different person than you were a year ago, I observed, watching her move through her home with such confidence and joy. I feel like a completely different person, my mother admitted. I feel like I've finally grown into the woman I was always meant to be. What do you mean by that? David asked. I spent so many years feeling frustrated, feeling like I had more to offer but couldn't find the right circumstances to express it, my mother explained. I think I took that frustration out on the people around me sometimes, especially you two. Mom, I started to say, but she held up her hand. Let me finish, she said gently. I know I was critical of your choices, Jessica. And David, I know I didn't always treat you with the respect you deserved. I was worried about Jessica's future, but I think I was also envious of the partnership you two had built together. Envious? I asked, surprised by her admission. You had something I'd never experienced, my mother said. A true partnership, someone who believed in your dreams and supported your goals. Your father was a good man, but he never really understood my ambitions the way David understands yours. The conversation was heading in a direction I hadn't expected, and I found myself growing more emotional by the moment. I'm sorry if I made you feel like your relationship wasn't valuable, my mother continued. I can see now that I was wrong about a lot of things. Thank you for saying that, David said quietly. It means more than you know. Your family, my mother replied firmly, and family should lift each other up, not tear each other down. After dinner, we exchanged gifts in the living room by the Christmas tree. My mother had been thoughtful and generous, giving me a beautiful set of jewelry-making tools that must have cost a small fortune, and surprising David with a first-edition book about investment strategies that showed she'd been paying attention to his interests. When my mother opened our gift and read the note I'd written, her eyes filled with tears. This is beautiful, she said, holding the framed photo of the three of us. You wrote that I inspire you to be generous and loving. That's the most meaningful thing anyone has ever said to me. It's true, I said, my voice slightly unsteady. Watching you transform these past few months, seeing how happy you've become, has been inspiring. I've learned something important this year, my mother said, settling back in her chair with the photo. Happiness isn't just about having nice things or living in beautiful places. It's about feeling valued, feeling like you matter to the people around you. You do matter, David said. You matter very much. Thank you, my mother replied, both of you, for being patient with me, for loving me despite my flaws, for being here to share this wonderful new chapter of my life. David and I exchanged a look, both of us recognizing that this was the moment we'd been waiting for. Mom, I said carefully, there's something we need to tell you, something important about your inheritance. What about it? My mother asked, her expression shifting to concern. Well, David began, it's about Harold Patterson. Is something wrong with the legal paperwork? My mother asked quickly. Is there a problem with the trust? No, nothing like that, I assured her. The legal paperwork is all perfectly valid. It's just that Harold Patterson isn't exactly who you think he is. My mother looked confused, glancing between David and me as if trying to understand what we were telling her. I don't understand, she said slowly. What do you mean he's not who I think he is? David took a deep breath. Mrs. Patterson, Harold Patterson never existed. He's a fictional character we created as part of a legal structure to give you this condo anonymously. What? My mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. The inheritance, the trust, the condo, I said gently. It all came from us. David and I bought you this place. That's impossible, my mother said, shaking her head. You don't have that kind of money. David's unemployed, and you work part-time at a boutique. Actually, David said, reaching into his briefcase for documents he'd brought. I haven't been unemployed for over 2 years. I'm a day trader, and I've been quite successful. He handed her his most recent portfolio statement, the same type of document he'd shown Michelle months ago. My mother stared at the numbers, her expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning comprehension. This says you made over $60,000 last month, she said slowly. That was a particularly good month, David replied. But yes, my trading has been very profitable. But you work from home, my mother said, still struggling to process the information. You don't go to an office. I work from home because day trading requires constant attention to market movements, David explained. I spend 12 to 14 hours a day analyzing trends and executing trades. You've been doing this the whole time I thought you were unemployed? Yes, David said simply. I kept it private because I wanted to make sure my success was sustainable before I changed our lifestyle or told anyone about it. My mother turned to me, her eyes wide with shock. And you knew about this? I found out a few months ago, I said, when David decided we could afford to do something special for you. Something special for me, my mother repeated slowly. You bought me $1 million condominium as something special? We bought you your dream home, I corrected gently, because we love you, and because we wanted you to have the life you'd always dreamed of. But why the deception? My mother asked. Why not just tell me the truth? Because, David said carefully, we didn't think you'd accept such an expensive gift from your unemployed son-in-law and your daughter who would never amount to anything. My mother flinched at hearing her own words reflected back to her. I never said Jessica would never amount to anything, she protested weakly. You said it to Mrs. Henderson, I said gently, about 6 months ago, when I came to visit and overheard you talking in the kitchen. You heard that conversation? Every word, I confirmed, about how I'd never amount to anything meaningful, about how David was unemployed, and we were probably struggling to pay rent. My mother closed her eyes, clearly remembering the conversation and understanding how her words had sounded. I was worried about you, she said quietly. I didn't understand your choices, and I was afraid you were limiting your potential. We understand that, David said, but we also wanted to show you that your concerns were unfounded. So you bought me a house, my mother said, still sounding dazed. We bought you a home, I corrected. We bought you the life you deserve to have. With money you earned through the career I criticized, my mother said, looking at David with something approaching awe. With money we earned together, David said firmly. Jessica's support made my success possible. Her belief in me, her willingness to live simply while I built my trading business, her partnership in everything we do. I don't know what to say, my mother admitted, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. You don't have to say anything, I said, moving to sit beside her on the couch. We just wanted you to know the truth. But I've been so ungrateful, my mother said, her voice breaking. I've been crediting Harold Patterson for giving me everything I wanted, when it was actually you two all along. You haven't been ungrateful, David said, joining us on the couch. You've been exactly what we hoped you'd be. Happy, fulfilled, generous with others. But you must think I'm terrible, my mother said, looking between us with anguish. The things I said about you, the way I treated you. We think you're human, I said simply. We think you were worried about my future and didn't have all the information you needed to understand our situation. Now you have all the information, David added. And you can see that Jessica chose exactly the right partner, someone who believes in her dreams and works to make them possible. I can see that, my mother said, wiping her eyes. I can see that I was completely wrong about everything. You weren't wrong about wanting me to be happy and successful, I said. You were just wrong about what that would look like. Can you forgive me? My mother asked. For not believing in you, for not supporting your choices, for being so blind to what you were building together. There's nothing to forgive, David said immediately. Your family doesn't keep score. But I want to do better, my mother said firmly. I want to be the mother and mother-in-law you both deserve. You already are, I said, hugging her tightly. These past few months, seeing how happy you've been, how kind you've been to us, how generous you've become with others, that's the mother I always knew was there. This place changed me, my mother said, looking around her beautiful living room. This place didn't change you, David said. This place gave you the freedom to be yourself. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories and feelings we'd never been able to express before. My mother asked detailed questions about David's trading business, showing genuine interest and respect for his expertise. She apologized repeatedly for her past criticisms, and we repeatedly assured her that we understood her motivations and held no grudges. What happens now? My mother asked as the evening wound down. Now we move forward as a family, I said, with honesty and appreciation for each other. I want to help, my mother said suddenly. With your business, with your charitable plans, with whatever you're building together. We'd love your help, David said. We've been talking about starting a scholarship fund for young artists. Artists like Jessica was, my mother said, understanding immediately. Young people who need support for their creative dreams. Exactly, I said. Would you be interested in helping us develop that program? I would be honored to help, my mother said, her voice filled with emotion. It would give me a chance to make up for not supporting your dreams when you were younger. It would give us a chance to build something meaningful together, David corrected. All three of us, as a team. As we prepared to leave that night, my mother hugged us both with a fierceness that spoke to years of misunderstanding finally being resolved. Thank you, she whispered, for the home, for the truth, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on myself. Thank you, I replied, for becoming the person we always knew you could be. Driving home through the quiet streets of Willowbrook Estates, David and I were both quiet for several minutes, processing the emotional intensity of the evening. That went better than I ever imagined, I said finally. She understood, David said with satisfaction. She understood why we did it the way we did, and she understood what it meant. She understood that we love her, I said. Despite everything, we love her, and we want her to be happy. And now she knows that her unemployed son-in-law bought her dream house with cash, David said with a smile. Now she knows that her daughter, who would never amount to anything, married exactly the right person, I added. We all know that now, David said, reaching over to take my hand. Your mother, Mrs. Henderson, anyone else who doubted us. What's next for us? I asked. Next, we build that scholarship fund, David said. We help young artists the way we wish someone had helped you. With my mother's help, I said, still marveling at how the evening had unfolded. With your mother's help, David agreed. All of us working together to create something positive. I love you, I said suddenly, overwhelmed by gratitude for the man who had seen my pain and found such a creative way to heal it. I love you too, David replied, and I love that we're finally free to be completely honest about who we are and what we've accomplished. No more secrets, I said. No more secrets, David agreed. Just a family that finally understands each other. The next morning, Christmas Day, my mother called us early with a voice full of excitement and purpose. I've been thinking all night, she said, about the scholarship program, about how we can make it work. I have ideas, lots of ideas. We'd love to hear them, I said, putting her on speaker so David could participate in the conversation. I want to use my new craft room, she said. I want to invite scholarship recipients here for workshops, for mentoring sessions, for support meetings. I want this beautiful space to become a place where young artists can learn and grow. That's a wonderful idea, David said. Having a dedicated space for the program would make it much more personal and effective. And I want to contribute financially too, my mother continued. Not just time and space, but actual funding. Harold's Inheritance should go toward helping young people the way you two helped me. Harold's Inheritance is yours, I said. You can do whatever you want with it. I want to honor the people who really gave it to me, my mother said firmly. I want to use this gift to help create more gifts for others. That sounds perfect, David said. That sounds like exactly the right way to move forward. As we finished the phone call and began planning our day, I realized that our elaborate Christmas Eve revelation had accomplished something even more significant than we'd originally intended. We hadn't just shown my mother that she'd been wrong about our financial situation. We'd created the foundation for a genuine partnership, a family dynamic based on mutual respect and shared values. You know what this means? I said to David as we made breakfast together. What? It means we really did it, I said. We really changed everything. We really did, David agreed, pulling me into a kiss that tasted like coffee and Christmas morning, and the promise of a future built on truth rather than assumptions. Your mother was right about one thing, David said as we settled at our kitchen table with our breakfast. What's that? This is going to be a very memorable Christmas, David said with a smile. The most memorable Christmas ever, I agreed, thinking about how far we'd all come from that painful conversation I'd overheard in my mother's kitchen so many months ago. Now, instead of criticism and disappointment, we had partnership and possibility. Instead of misunderstanding and judgment, we had truth and appreciation. Instead of a family divided by assumptions, we had a family united by love and mutual respect. And most importantly, my mother finally understood that her daughter had not only amounted to something meaningful, but had found someone who valued her worth and worked to make her dreams possible. Together, we had built something beautiful, something lasting, something worthy of celebration. The unemployed son-in-law had indeed bought his mother-in-law's dream house with cash. But more than that, he had bought her understanding, her respect, and her recognition of the remarkable partnership she had spent so long underestimating. It was the greatest gift any of us could have asked for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.